Hey, what is the criminalization of homelessness?
I am so glad you asked that question, James. The criminalization of homelessness means being subject to either surveillance by policing or bylaw for what would be considered of activities of daily living. So, sitting on a boulevard, sleeping somewhere, those are activities of daily living. And sometimes people get, well, in many places, people would get ticketed for those activities. And in other times, they would be harassed for being in public spaces and simply living because they don't have other spaces to be in. And, you know, the criminalization of homelessness, I'll give another example during the pandemic when, everyone was supposed to be at home and some cities were ticketing people for not being at home. Well, how do you ticket people for not being at home when they don't have a home? And there were some pretty tragic stories during COVID of, individuals who were trying to hide and, came to harm. There were some pretty high profile stories, um, that really highlighted how people simply trying to live were being criminalized for those activities. Um, and I don't have it right off the top of my head, but if you want me to pull it out, I think Seattle has done some of the best work on kind of the costs of criminalization, because that's the other piece, is that we're spending money criminalizing homelessness, giving people tickets and, enforcing bylaws, or, policing people. We're spending a lot of money to manage homelessness, money that could be well spent on investments into homelessness instead.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
I
So
don't know
how
if this
can,
is, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know if this is worth mentioning, but one of the things that's happening across the country is looking at alternatives responses to policing, particularly around homelessness and mental health crises and
Hmm.
so on. Um, that's not going to give people housing, but it's at least going to give a connection to the system that's a non-policing response. You're
Hmm.
smiling, James. Something must be
Oh my
happening
God.
there.
Uh, it's stuff we run into every day, right?
Right.
And we specifically don't even, we have what's called the Peterborough drug strategy, which the police are involved with, but are we can never publicize their involvement because people won't have anything to do with it. So it's
Right.
just, a daily occurrence for us. I can remember the first lockdown, coming out of a grocery store. Someone suffering from mental illness and homelessness was crying because they thought they were going to be arrested for not having a home. It's heartbreaking, but yeah.
Yeah, you should let James talk.
Hmm.
Uh,
He just
Oh,
put it so eloquently,
he
like it's
did.
like how tragic,
yeah.
and the stress that um, there's some very interesting research out of Colorado where they tracked people um, and some of the impact on their mental health,
Yeah.
of bylaw specifically and policing. And, people are not sleeping as well, which we know is going to impact
Hmm.
your mental health and, your behavior. Um, and people were much experienced higher levels of stress because they were worried about bylaw and policing being around. And so you take someone who's in a very vulnerable position already and subject to, a very stressful condition of trying to survive, and then you add on the stress of surveillance by bylaw and
Hmm.
policing.
Hmm.
And it is in some ways amazing to me to see sort of people in some ways coping with it, at the same time that the system doesn't recognize what is happening, and that's really the, you know, bigger issue, trying to highlight that these are not systemic responses to homelessness. And, you know, if we go a bit further around the criminalization of homelessness, I'll just mention this because I'm sure, you know, both of you are aware of, you know, the approach Toronto has taken to displace people from encampments, displace them with nowhere to go. And I just, you know, when I think about that just from a human rights perspective, but then also a health perspective, like it's extremely difficult for me to understand how one, you know, how human beings can do that to other human beings. Like
Absolutely.
I'm a bit lost for words, and I've kind of watched it, you know, we've watched it unfold here too, where people have been displaced from camps, often with nowhere to go. They're constructed as being threatening or, you
Safety
know,
hazard.
safety. We hear all kinds of safety concerns, and yet we're talking about people who are often quite, you know, they're trying to survive, and they're trying to survive in the best kind of way that they can. They often don't have enough food. They're, you know, so it's not like, you know, this show of force that was recently shown in Toronto is just beyond the pale to me, to understand that that would be an approach that a municipal government would take. And it's not to say we don't have it here. We have. More recently, though, we've had the clearings or displacements happen with, and I think they would say this too, with housing being offered, but then becomes the question of are they offering adequate housing? So here, originally, a lot of it was offering of hotels, which are better than shelters in the sense that they have a door, you know, they have some privacy. I'm not saying that they're completely, they don't completely meet the definition of adequate housing. But if you're clearing people because they're refusing an offer to shelter, or you're not offering them anything, like, how are you fixing a problem? You're just moving it to another space and another place and putting stress on a lot of already stressful situation. And I mean, that's part of criminalization for sure.
For sure.
You know, people get ticketed, they get arrested for trying to live and survive.
I heard something on the news. Somebody, I don't even know who it was now in Toronto, saying, well, you know, people need to be able to use these parks. I was like, are you kidding me?
Well, one of the other strange things that's happened is that some of the parks and locations have been fenced off. So even if this happened in the downtown east side, where the parks were fenced off, we had that for a while too, where, so I mean, the public couldn't even access those public spaces either. And, you know, people can coexist in public spaces, that is for sure. But, you know, again, there's a lot of stereotypes that get rolled out in these kinds of situations. And, you know, we have people who, you know, are obviously seeing someone and not recognizing the broader kind of issues that have led to homelessness.